snow delay. Believe me, when we planned this conference, we had images of cherry blossoms and warm weather, and we were going to be sitting out on the patio and so forth. But well, climate change is what it is, and so here we are. But I want to thank you very much for coming out on a snowy morning. We're very happy to have you with us and to begin the conference. Just a couple of small practical things, of course. Silence your cell phones in respect of our speakers. Please, I've forgotten to do mine, so you know it's going to go off right now, actually, just as I'm saying that. For those of you who, a couple people have asked about an internet connection, there is Wi-Fi here. I'll just read the user ID and the password, and then you can come see me if you don't remember it. The user ID is HU-visitor, and the password is Bison1867. All right, we are getting started here about a half an hour late. We're going to nonetheless try to go ahead and run our program and maybe have slightly shorter coffee breaks. For those of you who do feel like you need a break, let me just point out to you that the room right behind the chapel, which has a double-sided mirror, and it is actually a room that is open for you to go and sit and relax if you want, and you can still see the proceedings that are going on here. All right, so we're going to begin today with a recitation from the Qur'an, and we're very pleased to have with us Sheikh Rashid Lamti, who is an imam and instructor at the International Institute of Islamic Thought in Herndon, Virginia, and he is going to be reciting for us from Surah Ash-Shura.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم ذلك الذي يبشر الله عباده الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات قل لا أسألكم عليه أجرا إلا المودة في القربى ومن يقترف حسنة نزد له فيها حسنا إن الله غفور شكور أم يقولون افترى على الله كذبا فإن يشأ الله يختم على قلبك ويمحو الله الباطل ويحق الحق بكلماته إنه عليم بذات الصدور وهو الذي يقبل التوبة عن عباده ويعفو عن السيئات ويعلم ما تفعلون ويستجيب الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات ويزيدهم من فضله والكافرون لهم عذاب شديد ولو بسط الله الرزق لعباده لبغوا في الأرض ولكن ينزل بقدر ما يشاء إنه بعباده خبير بصير وهو الذي ينزل الغيث من بعد بعد ما قنطوا وينشر رحمته وهو الولي الحميد. ومن آياته خلق السماوات والأرض وما بث فيهما من دابة وهو على جمعهم إذا يشاء قدير. وما أصابكم من مصيبة فبما كسبت أيديكم ويعفو عن كثير. وما أنتم بمعجزين في الأرض وما لكم من دون الله من ولي ولا نصير. ومن آياته الجوار في البحر كالأعلام إن يشأ يسكن الريح فيظللن رواكد على ظهره إن في ذلك لآيات لكل صبار شكور. أو يوبقهن بما كسبوا ويعفو عن كثير. ويعلم الذين يجادلون في آياتنا ما لهم من محيص. فما أوتيتم من شيء فمتاع الحياة الدنيا وما عند الله خير وأبقى للذين آمنوا وعلى ربهم يتوكلون. والذين يجتنبون كبائر الإثم والفواحش وإذا ما غضبوا هم يغفرون. والذين استجابوا لربهم وأقاموا الصلاة وأمرهم شورى بينهم ومما رزقناهم ينفقون. والذين إذا أصابهم البغي هم ينتصرون. وجزاء سيئة سيئة مثلها فمن عفا وأصلح فأجره على الله إنه لا يحب الظالمين. ولمن انتصر بعد ظلمه فأولئك ما عليهم من سبيل. إنما السبيل على الذين يظلمون الناس ويبغون في الأرض بغير الحق أولئك لهم عذاب أليم. ولمن صبر وغفر إن ذلك لمن عزم الأمور. ومن يضلل الله فما له من ولي من بعده. وترى الظالمين لما رأوا العذاب يقولون هل إلى مرد من سبيل. وتراهم يعرضون عليها خاشعين من الذل ينظرون من طرف خفي. وقال الذين آمنوا إن الخاسرين الذين خسروا أنفسهم وأهليهم يوم القيامة عذاب مقيم وما كان لهم من أولياء ينصرونهم من دون الله ومن يضلل الله فما له من سبيل استجيبوا لربكم من قبل أن يأتي يوم لا مرد له من الله ما لكم من ملجأ يومئذ وما لكم من نكير فإن اعرضوا فما أرسلناك عليهم حفيظا إن عليك إلا البلاغ وإنا إذا أذقنا الإنسان منا رحمة فرح بها وإن تصبهم سيئة بما قدمت أيديهم فإن الإنسان كفور صدق الله العظيم.
Thank you very much for that. Well, this conference would not be possible without the help of our sponsors. I want to thank certainly the Prince Al-Walid bin Talal Center for Muslim-Christian Understanding, the Ali Verlag Center for Global Islamic Studies at George Mason, the International Institute of Islamic Thought, but also, of course, this would not be possible at all without the very warm hospitality of the Howard Divinity School. And I want to thank the school very much for its willingness to host this conference. And I would like to begin with a few words from Dean Pollard, Dean of the Howard School of Divinity.
Good morning to all. I have to be careful of all this spaghetti up here that I don't disconnect anything. Got to the cake. It is good to have all of you here today. And I want to especially acknowledge our colleague, Dr. Zainab Awani, for the leadership that she has taken in working with colleagues from George Mason and Georgetown and other communities nearby in order to make this conference happen. There are a number of things that I would like to say, but let me first begin by noting how privileged and honored we are here at the School of Divinity to have you in our midst on this snowy morning. We know that it takes a little bit extra initiative at the end of March when spring has officially come into existence per the calendar, and yet we are sitting in snow. I'm from Minnesota, so for me this is no big deal. But for others, it is always a monumental effort to come out in this kind of weather. So we're looking forward to those who will yet gather with us. Contemplating the Qur'an is a historic gathering. This conference brings together distinguished scholars, community leaders, students, and friends, inviting us all to learn and to understand from one another. What makes this gathering historic for me is its location at Howard University. Howard University School of Divinity is a historically Black graduate theological institution where the wisdom and understanding of the Qur'an have heretofore not been central to our academic enterprise, and where we now seek to extend our discussion to a tradition with a long and enduring presence among peoples of African descent, including African Americans, here in these United States. This two-day conference is set to explore the question of Islam and modernity through various theoretical, conceptual, and case study approaches. To my mind, Contemplating the Qur'an is the latest chapter in the critical effort to enhance our understanding of contemporary Quranic scholarship. In important ways, your meeting here, and I really underscore this, your meeting here additionally serves to forward the integration of Islam into the School of Divinity's instruction and programs. Those of you who know me in the room are familiar with my own biography, that I am a student of C.R. Lincoln. C.R. Lincoln was a renowned sociologist of religion who, more than half a century ago, wrote the trailblazing book, The Black Muslims in America. It set off a firestorm of controversy from all sectors of the scholarly and religious worlds, and became a primer for decades with respect to seeking to understand the growing phenomenon of Islam as it was then taking place in the United States. 40 years ago, C.R. Lincoln edited another book called The Black Religious Experience in America. And in this text, Lincoln explored the diversity of African American religiosity, focusing on the Hebrew Israelites, Santeria, Condomblé, and Islam as it was emerging both as al-Islam in the West and in other derivations at the time. C.R. Lincoln is the person who is best associated and known in connection with me. But there are two other scholars that I want to mention briefly this morning who had one a tremendous impact on me, the other a lesser but still significant corollary. Charles H. Long, Charles Houston Long, the renowned and now retired historian of religion, mentored me during my PhD studies at Duke University, and I was there with the then, were you chair of the religion department at that time?
I think it's fair. I was still really professor.
Okay. You were, in any way, Dr. Bruce Lawrence, yeah, director of graduate studies, right. Well, that's the only thing I knew at the time. But he was a director of the graduate studies, and I came into the program at that time. So I was doing my studies at Duke, but also at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, with Charles Long. Long is a graduate of the University of Chicago, and more specifically, the Chicago School of the History of Religions, a consciously reflexive and comparative approach to the study of religion that was championed in North America by Joachim Weill and Mircea Eliade. The history of religion assumes as its critical point of departure regard for the authenticity of religious expressions and institutions, and stresses in its methodology the systematic study of the same to arrive at what it intends to be a sound theory of the study of religion. At the same time, the task of the historian of religion is to understand the religious significance of a religion within its own ecological context, the interactions and exchanges between humankind and the world, real and symbolic, from our extraordinary interactions with nature to the encroachments of humanity upon itself, encroachments that have taken a variety of forms from mercantilism, enslavement, genocide, empire, new modalities, hierarchies, and so on, have given commensurate rise to valences of power and revalorizations of religious meaning. This is what I learned from Charles Long. And I often heard him relate an anecdote about a Buddhist monk who, upon meeting Alexander the Great, is famously said to have asked him 3 questions, and I repeat them. The first question was, who are you? The second was, do you not have a home? And the third was, why are you not at home? These questions that were embraced in the midst of conquest and empire, broadly speaking, refer to the human quest for meaning, acceptance, and orientation with respect to both religion and life. At the complex intersections of our humanity, both acknowledged and denied, reside the occasion for constructive religious hermeneutics. To a somewhat lesser degree, I was influenced as well by Wilfred Cantwell Smith when I was a student at the Harvard Divinity School. Smith was a scholar of comparative religions whose academic specialty, some of you may know, was Islam. He was also a minister in the United Church of Canada. In his book, Towards a World Theology, Wilfred Cantwell Smith relates the story of Leo Tolstoy and his quote-unquote conversion from a worldly life to a life of ascetic service. His story begins with Barlam, a Sinai desert monk, and Josaphat, the Indian prince. Josaphat's life is transformed from worldly power to the quest for deeper moral and spiritual truths by his encounter with Barlam. Tolstoy learned this story from the Russian Orthodox Church, who received it in turn from the Byzantine Church, who gleaned it from the Muslims, who learned it from the Manichaees, who heard it from the Buddhists. The tale of Barlam and the tale of Barlam and Josaphat is in its origins a story of the Buddha. Bodhisattva becomes Bodhisattva in Manichae, and Josaphat in later iterations of the tale. I've often thought about these connections between our disparate religious traditions and scriptures and worlds, of chance encounters and forced impositions, of sacred memories gained and lost and recast. In my own tradition of African America, no telling of the story of Martin Luther King Jr., the Christian, is accurate without reference to the role of Malcolm X, the Muslim, and vice versa. Globally speaking, there is no understanding of Martin King without reference to Mahatma Gandhi, the Hindu. There is no understanding of El Hajj Malik al-Shabazz without homage to the Pan-African Orthodox Jamaican Marcus Garvey. Gandhi himself was formed in the early 20th century crucible of the South African pass laws and the nascent African National Congress that would give rise to Nelson Mandela. But before Gandhi would return to India, he would be transformed by South Africa. Garvey becomes a prophet to the followers of Haile Selassie I, known to some as Jesus incarnate, but to all as Rastafari. And so it goes. Histories and cultures, ancient and modern, serve to remind us of our indelible connections to each other, no matter how much we deign to forget or deny each other's stories. My understanding of today's gathering is that it is not an exercise in emphasizing religious harmony so much as a contemplation of the deep richness inherent in Islam and the Qur'an and in religious difference itself. More recent westward expansions of Islam, joined with prior Western conceptualizations of Judaism and Christianity, constitute the primary datum for your presentations, even as religious communities east and south relocate and expand Islam far beyond its geographical origins. As scholars of Islam here in this country, across disciplines and across universities, you are already devoted to this analytic and ultimately humanizing work. Some of you have been at this for decades, of ensuring that we understand the commonality of us all in the deep, rich diversity of us all. At Howard University School of Divinity, we welcome our Muslim sisters and brothers. We welcome you as Muslim scholars, and we welcome you as scholars of Islam in service and in the academy. as family, and as our own, with all the promise in peril that the embrace of family entails. Welcome to the School of Divinity.
I greet you with peace and blessing of God. My name is Zainab Alwani. Dr. Yunus Mirza is here. Finally, I was worried about you. This conference is really started from the beginning with an idea. But that idea, simple idea, I think brought three of us, Dr. Bikati and Dr. Mirza, along with me, just to discuss the Qur'an, the trends, the scholarship in the West and also in the East that related to the Book of God. Then we had to decide also the place. And with the generosity of Howard University School of Divinity, they accepted to host the conference. I'm really honored to stand among all of you today, among men and women, whose compassion for advancing knowledge and understanding has compelled them to leave their homes with this storm and sacrifice their time so that they analyze, discuss, contemplate, and understand a text that is the center of 1.6 billion people lives in this world and has been the center of Muslims' lives for nearly 14 centuries. Thank you, of course, to all of you, the audience, the participants, the sponsors, and of course the organizers. Why contemplating the Qur'an? A consistent feature of Quranic interpretation throughout the last 1500 years of Islamic history has been its multiplicity of interpretations. As a message that addresses humanity as a whole, the Qur'an allows room for countless readings as long as they do not conflict with the Quranic main principles. It is therefore impossible to impose a single authoritative reading on the Qur'an without violating its own description of itself as a universal message for humankind. The Creator, as the Muslims believe, pledged to safeguard the Qur'an when he said, "We have without doubt sent down the message, and we will certainly guard it from corruption." 15:9. The purpose behind the command to preserve the Qur'an in its original language was to ensure that the book remained able to establish the way of life that God wished for humankind. There is profound wisdom in the fact that millions of Muslims read and recite it in its exact original language and in the form that it was revealed. Since this remains the foundation on which all Muslims agree at all times and in all places, however much their paths might differ. Hence, the Prophet, peace be upon him, and the leading scholars who followed him were determined that every letter of the Qur'an should be first memorized in people's minds and hearts, and then transcribed. Interestingly, although the Prophet had knowledge of the meaning of every verse in the Qur'an, those verse. His wife Aisha narrated that the Prophet of God only gave interpretations of a few verses from the Qur'an, which were taught to him by Jibreel. These verses deal with the matters related to al-ghayb, the unseen, together with other questions that can only be understood through revelation. Concerning the Prophet's companions who witnessed the revelation, they knew the reasons for the verses, revelation, as well as the factors linking the verses to real historical events, that it later led to the development of an important field of exegesis called asbab al-nuzul, the reasons for revelation. So much has been said by the companions regarding asbab al-nuzul that Imam al-Ghazali and Imam al-Qurtubi remarked it would be incorrect to assume that everything said about tafsir by the companions actually came from the Prophet for two reasons. One is that it is only established that Prophet gave tafsir, exegesis of a few verses. The other is that they themselves differ in their tafsir on various points that cannot be reconciled and cannot all have come from the Prophet. The Quran encourages the readers to contemplate its rhetorical and suggestive passages and arrive at the spiritual truth to their own, essentially awakening its readers from a metaphoric stagnation. Implied here is the contention that the intellect should not be constrained by a limited understanding of the Quran that imprisons its meaning in a particular period or ties it to a given generation. Indeed, one of the most effective ways of bringing a person closer to her and his God is by reading the Quran and constantly contemplating its verses and their meanings. By contemplation here, we mean reciting the ayah or the verse multiple times, reviewing it, dwelling on its meaning in an attempt to know all the possible meanings it contains, and allowing one's thought to wander freely and wander freely through it in order to arrive at the accurate meanings. Despite the interpretive pluralism that exists, one may ask, why have some interpretations of the Quran gained greater recognition by the Muslim community over others? If every human being is free to understand the Quran as he or she wishes, then what conditions govern the interpretive process so that it does not become a subjective process? There is a consensus among the scholars throughout the history of the Ummah, which is this maybe part of the answer, of the Ummah that interpreting the Quran through the Quran is the most accepted method of interpretation. The Quran criticizes a reading that is selective and calls for a selective and comprehensive reading to analyze context and meaning. Exegesis, tafsir, is a field of Islamic scholarship that has impacted intellectual, societal, and political perceptions on many issues. Methodological trends in classical exegesis fall into at least two categories. The first trend, known as a tafsir bil-ma'thur, this is exegesis by the hadith or maxim, employs the Prophet's words and actions as the framework of textual engagement. In the second trend, known as tafsir bil-ra'i, exegesis by opinion, interpretation is based on rational analysis of a variety of sources. How can a tafsir, exegesis, be by means of a free exercises of the mind? Why or how could tafsir, bil-ra'i, by reason, be resorted to when there existed prophetic ahadith traditions that prohibited the interpreting the Quran on the basis of personal opinion? How then should we expect a contemporary committed Muslim researchers and scholars in any discipline today to apply his or her opinion to interpret the himself. Wisdom, therefore, seems to suggest that Muslim intellect should be allowed to continue with its efforts of contemplation, reflections, and deductions in order to understand the verses of the Qur'an. Numerous books of interpretations throughout the ages, and interpreters have adopted a wide range of approaches in their deductions of the meaning of the Qur'an. For example, Fakhruddin al-Razi, that is 606 in the Hijri calendar 1209, stated that if he wished to produce a catalogue of interpretations on Surah Al-Fatiha, he would be able to do so. Al-Qurtubi and others could have derived tons of issues from the meaning of a single ayah, verse. Therefore, the position or school of thought that considered rational interpretations to be bid'ah or an acceptable innovation in the sense intended by narrated hadith prohibiting interpretation by personal opinion could belong to the following reasons. 1. Interpretation based on personal opinion without a serious consideration for the genius of the Arabic language, its style, reasons of revelation, and the objectives of Sharia. This kind of interpretation is pure guesswork and contributes nothing to the advancement of truth. Second, interpretation would involve thought, but of a defective understanding. The interpreter draws his or her conclusions from the apparent meaning of the words, or even an aspect of this meaning, and takes this to be the only meaning intended in the ayah or the verse. 3. When the interpreter is a follower of a particular school of thought or sect or tendency which causes him to interpret certain verses of the Qur'an to suit the views of their schools of thought without taking linguistic meaning and the other reasons as we mentioned. However, there are 3 methods of interpretation which render exegesis by ra'i, or rational thought, to be acceptable. 1. Restricting it to the understanding of the obvious meanings of the words. 2. Deriving concepts implied by the obvious meanings of the word. These would be arrived at by capable interpreters after careful thinking and would be based on linguistic consideration in conjunction with its usage and would not ignore the aims or the goals of Sharia, of the Qur'an, verse 3. When the interpreter makes use of the intellectual, scientific, and cultural resources of his or her time and applies them to the verses to see how compatible they are with the pointers of the Qur'an. The interpreter can then decide how these disciplines can be approached in light of the Qur'an. For example, when a modern Muslim economist, maybe a psychologist, sociologist, or any other field, considers verses that relate to his or her field, and then puts forward an idea never previously raised by the scholars in which this can best be done for the public good. He or she should not be opposed on the grounds that this or his or her statement has never been made before and does not have the backing of a hadith. However, beginning in the 18th century, men and women have been taking a prominent role in studying and contemplating the main sources of Islamic knowledge, Qur'an and Sunnah. A different scriptural canon gradually began to emerge, driven by a distortion of exegesis based on reading the Qur'an intra-textually. Tafsirul Qur'ani bil Qur'an. Interpreting the Qur'an through the Qur'an. This trend in exegesis called for a critical examination of the extra-textual material that had been previously drawn into the fold of Quranic interpretations. It also emphasized the idea of organic unity of the Quran. It stresses more definitely the understanding that passages in the Quran clarify other passages, and that this hermeneutic strategy took precedent over all others. This intellectual debate that was developed then, it highlighted that Quran defines its own specific qualities and explains that it embodies a complete revelation with response to all situations throughout all the ages, past, present, and future. The Quranic organic methodological unity, particularly after the book was arranged so that the presence of its verses was no longer dictated by the period of revelation, a time when they were fragmented and limited by the specific occasions on which they were revealed. These qualities can also be discerned in the fact that the Quran is divinely preserved and that it renews its contribution to human affairs by uncovering its meaning according to the requirements of time. The debate led to the encouragement of a holistic reading that takes into consideration the organic unity of the Quran, the combined readings, and the Quranic language. The Quran's miraculous quality as being the exceptional of its poetic language, style, and elegance, for example, as Mustansir Mayer refers to in his article Language in the Blackwell Companion to the Quran, representing the highest possible peak that the Arabic language is capable of attaining, a brilliant treatment of language in a manner previously unknown in Arabic style, while remaining within the bounds of expression permitted by Arabic language. In the 50s, and even before that, the debate on the idea of the organic unity of the Quran was well developed and written in two very similar commentaries on the Quran, with a focus on interrelations and structures of surahs. Amin Ahsan Islahi of Pakistan and Sayyid Qutb of Egypt have developed the idea of core theme that links the unrelated passages of a given surah. It is one central idea that all the verses of the surah relate to this central idea. Islam refers to as al-amud or pillar, and Qutb uses mihwar, axis. As Salwa al-Awwa explained in her article, Linguistic Structure, also in the Blackwell Quran, it is the work of the interpreter to read, reread, and reflect on the meanings of different sections until the interpreter finds out what the mihwar or amud is. It is the interpreter's work to decide what the sections are, where they begin and where they end. In addition to deep reflection on the meanings of verses and surahs, some methodological principles also were suggested by both of them to guide the interpreter. For Islam, he suggested 6 principles for any legitimate interpretation, and you can find it listed in Mir, and Mir Mustansir in 1986. And Qutb, on the other hand, emphasizes the significant role of context, which is also one of Islami's principles in understanding the Quranic text. The previous scholars have been set for today's scholars in the East and in the West, searching for profound methodologies that help to contemplate and comprehend the Quran. Hence, the past, the present, and the future generations are not in any way capable to attaining a comprehensive understanding of the revelation. Instead, they each take from it as required by civilizational, social, and historical conditions, as well as the modes of thinking of their own time. In conclusion, I believe and I argue we live in a time that will be recorded as one of the most profound moments in human history. in terms of its impact in charting the course for the future. I argue that the period in which we currently live is unique, and we hope that this conference and its discussions will be documented as a positive change in the field of Quranic studies. Thank you and welcome.
So we'll begin with our first panel. We are only 50 minutes late. That's nothing, really. So I would like to invite our first panelists for the panel Structural Analysis of Quranic Narratives, Professor Sarah Tlili, Dalia Abu Hagar, and Professor Bruce Lawrence. So as we begin, I will ask each speaker to keep their presentation to about 15 minutes, maybe going to 20 if necessary, and then I will open the floor for questions. First of all, our first speaker is Professor Sarah Tlili. She is a professor of languages, literatures, and cultures, specializing in Arabic literature at the University of Florida. Her main research area is animals in Islam and in the Qur'an, as well as the stylistics of the Qur'an and Tunisian and Arabic literature. She recently published the book Animals in the Qur'an in 2012 with Cambridge University Press, and she will be speaking to us today about stone and sound motifs in Surah Al-Hijr. Please welcome Professor Tlili.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Professor Dick, for your introduction. Professor Alwani, that was a beautiful talk. Thank you very much. And actually, my presentation is within that context that you have discussed the unity of the Qur'an. So I hope that the analysis that I'm going to present here of Surah number 15 will contribute to that. Surah 15 is, like it has these narratives which seem to be disparate. They don't seem to have like a lot to do with one another, but I believe that closer analysis shows that in fact the surah is much more well integrated than it is generally believed. So I start with my presentation. Although Surah Al-Hijr has received scholarly attention, one of its important literary features remains today undetected. A stone and a sound motifs run through several levels of this surah, conveying a sense of rigidity and cracking. However, neither the genre of tafsir nor other analyses, such as Angelica Neuberg's article on this surah, reflect any awareness of them. The stone motif is first encountered in the surah's title. The word hijr is derived from the root ha, jin, ra, which refers to a hard body, especially a stone. The title refers to the well-known site north of Medina, which is called Al-Hijr. Because of its striking high cliffs. There is consensus among Qur'an exegetes that the Ashab al-Hijr are the same as the tribe of Thamud, frequently discussed in the Qur'an. If indeed there is a connection, the reference to them as Ashab al-Hijr is remarkable because this tribe is called 26 times in the Qur'an. It's called Thamud. However, it is called Ashab al-Hijr only in the surah. So the singularity of this designation and the fact that the surah itself is given the title Hijr suggests that there is an intention to underscore a stone-related motif. The stone motif appears also in the narrative about human's creation. Whereas in most Quranic contexts, the human being is said to be created from tin, which is clay or mud, turab, which is dust, nutfa, a drop of fluid, or water. In this surah, the human being is said to be created from dried clay, salsal. Unlike the other substances, salsal is characterized by dryness and rigidity. Indeed, this type of clay owes its name, which is onomatopoeic, to the feature of rigidity. Al-Khalil ibn Ahmed, the lexicographer, explains that, quote, any rigid body makes salsala, kullu dhi salaba yusalsil, end of quote. Similarly, the other lexicographer, Ibn Mandur, defines the word salsal as, quote, dry clay that issues sounds because of its dryness. الصلصال الطين اليابس الذي يصل من يبسه أي يصوت. End of quote. The word salsal occurs only 4 times in the entire Quran, 3 being in this surah. The repetition of the word salsal in this surah, compared to its singular occurrence in the rest of the Quran, signals the same intention of underscoring the same related message, this stone-related message or rigidity. The stone motif also appears in the Lot story. This prophet's people are punished with stones of baked clay that are rained down upon them. Thus, 3 of the main narratives in this surah have the stone motif in common. The stone motif is further accentuated by another, albeit subtler, theme: the scarcity, absence, or elusive presence of water. If, again, we accept the prevalent opinion that Ashab al-Hijr are the same as Thamud, the scarcity of water motif can be inferred firstly from this tribe's more common name. The root, that is the name Thamud, the root Tha, Mim, Dal, Thamada, from which the name Thamud is derived, indicates precisely this idea. Edward Lane explains the noun Thamud as, quote, water that is little in quantity, end of quote. The verb thamada means to extract a fluid to the last drop. Thus, thamada naqa, for example, means to exhaust a she-camel by milking, end of quote. And to say of a man thamadathun nisa means that women exhausted him of his seminal fluid. If this name is representative of this tribe's actual state, scarcity of water could then be one of the distinctive features of their dwellings, or an otherwise relevant detail to their narrative. The Thamud do not seem to have acquired this name randomly. From other surahs, we learn that water, or the scarcity thereof, is indeed an important theme in their narrative. This tribe was commanded to alternate access to its sources of water with a she-camel that was miraculously produced for them as a sign of their prophet's truthfulness. This arrangement suggests that water was not abundantly available in their valley. When the grammatical form of their name, which is an active participle, is considered, perhaps it is also justified to propose that this tribe may have contributed to this situation due to their mismanagement of their water sources. Since the verb thamada means to exhaust a fluid out of its source, the noun thamud, which is an intensive form of the active participle, suggests that this tribe overused the water available to them. Such behavior was perhaps not only ecologically unwise, but may have also been socially unjust. If the tribe's members were ordered to share the water with the she-camel, it is perhaps because before that they had failed to share it with one another. A sort of moral dryness consisting of greed and covetousness may have led to actual dryness in their physical setting. Remarkably, however, even the name Thamud, which still connotes the existence of some water, albeit in limited quantities, is omitted from their narrative in Surah Al-Hijr. In its stead, they are called Ashab al-Hijr, a name which invokes total dryness. Elusiveness of water can be sensed also in the human creation narrative. When one considers the various substances from which the first human is created, salsal turns out to be one of 2 dry matters, the second being turab, or dust. Unlike turab, however, salsal is a matter that lost its water after having been originally wet. the matter from which this clay originated is hama, or black mud, which is a slimy substance. So it is something that is originally wet and then it has become dry. Thus, similar to the Thamud scenario, the word salsal indicates that this dryness supersedes a stage of wetness. The Lot narrative conveys the elusiveness of water in a different manner. The people of Lot were punished with stones of baked clay that were rained down upon them. The image of stones raining down is of course notable, since rain usually consists of water, not stones. Thus, the verb amtara, to rain, evokes water, whereas stones affirm its absence in the same way that the words thamud or thamud and salsal bring to mind the idea of water, yet confirm its scarcity or disappearance. The stone-water connection is encountered also in another surah, in Surah Al-Baqarah, however, with major differences. In verse 74 of Surah Al-Baqarah, this is surah number 2 in the Qur'an, the children of Israel are told, quote, "Your hearts hardened and became like rocks or stones, hijara, or even harder, only to be reminded that there are rocks from which streams gush forth, and that there are some from which, when they are cleft, water issues, and that there are some that fall down for awe of God." The simile and images encountered in this verse are remarkable in several ways. First, they draw an explicit parallel between humans, particularly the human heart, and rocks. The hearts and rocks are similar here. Both of them are or can be characterized by hardness, qaswa. Second, rocks' hardness does not preclude the possibility that they may contain water. In fact, they, or presumably cavities within them, can be so saturated with it that rivers gush out of them. Third, being hard bodies, rocks can be cleft, yet when they contain water, such cleaving also releases water from them. Most importantly, however, in this image, rocks are ascribed a spiritual dimension, as some of them fall down for awe of God, min khashyatillah. Now, the word khashya is generally rendered in English as fear, but it is a special type of fear. Edward Lane renders it as fear with reverence, veneration, respect, honor, and awe. Surah Al-Mu'minun, this is surah number 23, elaborates on this trait, which is one of the trait of khashya, this particular type of fear, which is one of the chief characteristics of believers. It says, quote, "Surely those who tremble in fear of their Lord, min khashyati rabbihim mushfiqun, and those who believe in the signs of their Lord, and those who associate no one with their Lord, and those who give what they give, their hearts quaking that they are returning to their Lord, those vying in good works, outpacing to them." End of quote. Khashya, therefore, designates a type of fear that results from utter vigilance. This extreme watchfulness leads believers not only to perform good deeds, but also to hasten, yusari'un, to them, eventually outpacing everyone else. Khashya, however, is not restricted to believing humans or angels. Indeed, in both its first and last Quranic occurrences, here I'm following the textual order, not the chronological order, so in both these instances, the noun khashya is mentioned in the context of physically hard bodies. Stones or hijara in Surah Al-Baqarah, so this is the first time in the Quran that we see the word khashya, it occurs with the word hijara or stones. And the last one is with mountains, jabal, in Surah Al-Hashr, surah number 59. In the latter case, the divine voice affirms, quote, "Had we caused this Quran to descend upon a mountain, you would have seen it crumbling itself, breaking asunder from awe of God. لو أنزلنا هذا القرآن على جبل لرأيته خاشعا متصدعا من خشية الله." Both images thus point to rock's ability to experience fear of God, an ability that seems to be accompanied with or expressed through the act of splitting. Notably also, the Qur'an twice warns humans of the fire, the fuel of which consists of people and stones. وَقُودُهَا النَّاسُ وَالْحِجَارَةُ. So here, there is another way in which human beings and stones can be, connected, and this is not a very good way. Since the fuel of the hellfire consists of humans and stones, one is perhaps justifies to suggest that this is due to their common feature of qaswa. Qaswa, in fact, every time it occurs in the Qur'an, it's in connection with the human heart, and it's something, of course, that the Qur'an criticizes. Like when we see qaswa occurring with hijara, it is only in a comparative context between the human hearts and the hijara. And the Qur'an is, of course, critical of this, so could it be that qaswa is, at the end of the thing that leads humans and perhaps some rocks, I don't know, to be in the hellfire. Going back to Surah Al-Hijr, we find in it an image that recalls the one in Surah Al-Hashr, where the idea of splitting is expressed using a derivative of the root sada'a, the sad dal ain, and where it is also presented as an effect produced or producible by the Qur'an. Toward the end of this surah, Surah Al-Hashr, Surah 15, the main surah that I'm discussing here, the Prophet is commanded, isda' bima tu'mar. So in Surah Al-Hashr we have لو أنزلنا هذا القرآن على جبل لرأيته خاشعا متصدعا. We have the verb, like a word derived from tasadda, and here the Prophet is told isda' bima tu'mar, two derivatives of the same root. This verb isda' is rendered usually in English as proclaim or declare or shout. However, Edward Lane explains the word sada'a, now it's just sada'a, not sada'abi, as to cleave, to split, slip, or crack a hard thing, such as a glass or vessel, or wall, or the like of these. When accompanied by the preposition be, sada'abi, the verb acquires the idea of communicating forcefully, however, without losing the connotation of splitting or cracking. I have like a total of 17 minutes. So I think I'll be taking 3 more minutes. All right. About the sada'a, B, Fakhruddin al-Razi states that the imperative in this surah, isda' bima tu'mar, is mainly about splitting and separating, ash-shaq wal-fasl. Thus, for him, the Prophet, or the command, isda' bima tu'mar, does not merely consist of relaying God's message, but it means also to separate between truth and false. So there is the idea of separation or splitting here. The pronoun man in isda' bima tu'mar may denote the message of Islam in general, but at its core, this message consists of the Qur'an. Indeed, At-Tabari reports several early exegetes who understood the pronoun man, what, in this verse as a reference to the Qur'an. Thus, both Surah Al-Hijr and Surah Al-Hashr present the Qur'an as capable of producing the effect of sada, or cracking. This suggests that a parallel between mountains and the Prophet's audience is implied. Both recipients, whether potential or hypothetical, appear to be characterized by hardness and rigidity. Yet the Qur'an can have an overpowering effect on both of them, taking the form of cracking. This cracking, however, does not aim at destroying either entity, but rather at producing in them the feature of khashiyah. The fact that the verb sada'a means also to convey a message points to another motif, which is the motif of sound. The sound motif is present also in the word salsal, a body that acquires its name from the sound it issues. The same motif is present in the narrative of Ashab al-Hijr, who were punished by the cry, sayha. The people of Lot were also punished, whose punishment consisted of both the cry and the stone of rain. So we have the idea of sound also present in their narrative. It is also implied in the narrative of Ashab al-Aykah, who are identified with Madian, another tribe whose members, as we learn from other parts of the Qur'an, threatened to stone their prophet, Shu'aib, and who were punished by a cry. The interplay between the themes of stone and rigidity on the one hand, and sound and cracking on the other, appears thus to permeate significant parts of this surah. Surah Al-Hijr appears to belong to the Prophet's Meccan period, when Muhammad was commanded to take the message beyond his inner circle. At-Tabari maintains that, quote, the Prophet continued to preach secretly until the verse, proclaim what you have been commanded and avoid the disbelievers, was revealed, end of quote. When one considers the interplay between the motifs of stone and sound in the context of the revelation of this surah, subtle connections between message and milieu become discernible. First, the surah perhaps aims first at preparing the Prophet to face particularly stubborn opposition, the idea of rigidity. Second, the surah seems to counsel him to face this stubbornness forcefully, the idea of sadaq. Third, it seems also to reassure the Prophet that the word, again something that is connected to sound, the Qur'an itself, the word of God, the word that God has entrusted to him is powerful enough to create an impact. The Prophet is perhaps implicitly reminded as well that the aim of his mission is to transform the hearts of Meccans, in the same way that stones saturated with water burst into rivers. Hearts touched by the Qur'an may acquire the same positive, perhaps life-giving attributes ascribed to stones that gush out with water, particularly, and the khashiyah, and the feature of khashiyah, or fear of God. The multifaceted parallels drawn between humans and stones perhaps serves also to integrate humans in the natural world. Stones, in fact, do not only share with humans the attribute of rigidity, but are also transformable both physically and spiritually, and perhaps humans have something to learn from stones here. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that, Professor Talili. Our next speaker is Dalia Abu Hagar. She is a preceptor of Arabic at Harvard University. She obtained her PhD from the University of Pennsylvania, Department of Near Eastern Languages and Civilizations. Her dissertation, Repetition, a Key to Quranic Style, Structure, and Meaning, focuses on Quranic style and rhetoric. Her primary interests include stylistics of the Quran, Arabic language, and linguistics. And she will be speaking to us today about the Queen of Sheba, the hoopoe, and the ant, a structural analysis of the role of the story of Solomon in Surah An-Nahl.
In this paper, I conduct a structural analysis of the story of Solomon in Surah An-Nahl, the ants, using semantic rhetorical figures. Michel Kuiper's study of verbal and thematic repetition in the Quran has shown that at least certain surahs are indeed composed in circular patterns, typical of Semitic rhetoric. Kuiper shows how symmetrical patterns of repetition, including parallel and circular composition, help underline meanings and coherence in the surah. Kuiper explains that the intended message of a given passage is found in the center of a circular composition rather than at the end. A circular symmetry, also known as ring or concentric symmetry, is a pattern in which two corresponding repeated elements, terms, verses, or parts of a surah occur in reverse order on either side of a center. The center is usually a point of emphasis, and the upper part and the lower parts of the frame are antithetical or opposing. As I demonstrate in other parts of my work, the center can also be a point of reversal of states or actions. By contrast, in parallel symmetry, corresponding repeated elements appear in the same order in each sequence, highlighting a specific value, behavior, or a recurring pattern. My main thesis is that a close analysis of the structure of the story of Solomon in Surah An-Nahl highlights the coherence of the surah and reveals layers of meaning that are otherwise not evident in a surface reading. I will begin by introducing the story of Solomon, then I will point out the repeated elements in the story, the patterns they form, and the messages they communicate. The story of Solomon consists of short successive accounts that may seem from a first reading to be thematically disconnected. addresses mankind, proclaiming, quote, "O mankind, we have been taught the language of birds, and we have been given abundance." Next, Solomon and his host pass through the valley of ants. He hears an ant addressing its fellow colony members saying, quote, "O ants, go into your homes in case Solomon and his host unwittingly crush you." Then Solomon inspects the birds, notices the absence of the hoopoo, and threatens to punish or kill him, unless he brings to Solomon a convincing excuse for his absence. The hoopoo comes back to Solomon with the news that he found out about the kingdom of Sheba, informs him about their queen's magnificent throne and the abundance she has been given, yet still knows that the queen and her people are misguided, for instead of prostrating themselves to God, they prostrate themselves to the sun. Solomon is skeptical. He raises the possibility that the hoopoo may be lying, saying, quote, "We shall see whether you are telling the truth or lying." Solomon asks the hoopoo to deliver a letter to the queen in which he commands her and her people not to put themselves above him and to submit to God. The queen seeks advice from her council, then decides to send Solomon a gift to prove his intentions. Solomon rejects the queen's gift, and the queen visits Solomon, who magically brings her magnificent throne before her. Then she is invited to enter a hall paved of glass, which she mistakes for a pool of water. Solomon explains that it's just a hall paved with glass. She says, "My lord, I have wronged myself. I devoted myself with Solomon to God, the Lord of the world." In the story of Solomon, a parallel symmetry is formed by the repetition. Okay, so if you can follow the structures through the slides or the handouts. In the story of Solomon, a parallel symmetry is formed by the repetition of forms derived from the root nadara, which denotes the idea of to contemplate. This root thus revolves around the ideas of observation and rational inquiry. In the surah, the subjects of rational inquiry are the various delivered messages and attitudes. Solomon investigates the veracity of the hoopoo's report on the idolatry of the Queen of Sheba, quote, "Sanamburu." He also commands the hoopoo to weigh the queen's reaction to his message, quote, "Fambur." The council of the Queen of Sheba trusts her to evaluate Solomon's message, quote, "Fambur." The queen, who doubts Solomon's intentions, looks into his truthfulness as the prophet. She sends him a gift and weighs his response, quote, "Fanadiratun." The accounts in the story of Solomon appear to draw parallels between the various protagonists in the story and Muhammad's Meccan audience. The structure of parallel symmetry imparts a message to the Meccan audience, encouraging them to compare the situation and evaluate Muhammad's character and message and the consistency of his message, similar to the Queen of Sheba, who investigates the character of the Prophet Solomon, and similar to Solomon, who investigates the consistency and the truthfulness of the hoopoo's report. The story of Solomon is framed by three messenger stories. The story of Moses with the Pharaoh and his notables, the story of the people of Saleh, and the story of the people of Lot, which form a concentric symmetry structure. The frame is formed by the repetition of the roots nadara, which means to see, observe, and contemplate, and the root basara, which means to see, to realize, and to comprehend. Derivatives of the root basara differ from the root nadara in that the first does not denote the idea of reflecting or contemplating. These three stories depict the people's forthright rejection of their messengers and the miracles they are given. The Pharaoh and his notables witness Moses' staff turning into a serpent, but they deny this miraculous sign, quote, "in their wickedness and their pride, even though their souls acknowledge them as true." The people of Saleh categorically deny their messenger, reject his message, and even slaughter the shikama that he has produced for them as further sign of his truthfulness. Finally, the people of Lot take God's commands lightly, as Lot says to them, quote, "How can you commit this outrage, and your eyes are wide open, وَأَنْتُمْ مُبْصِرُونَ." The theme that is common to these stories is that the signs are crystal clear. However, due to the absence of nazar or contemplation, these communities fail to notice them. There may be an implied message both to the Prophet Muhammad and to his people here. The Meccan audience insists that the Prophet produce signs for them in support of his prophetic claims. Quote, the disbelievers say, why has no miracle been sent down to him from his Lord? The Qur'an's answer appears to be that those who do not reflect upon what they see will neither appreciate nor benefit from God's signs, whether ordinary or extraordinary. Isra Yazdioglu, in her paper Defining the Miraculous, discusses the notion of the ordinary versus the miraculous based on the words of the Zaman Sayyid Nursi, the modern Turkish exegete and thinker. According to Nursi, as Yazdioglu explains, one of the main purposes of the Qur'an is to reintroduce what is ordinary and usual to the reader. Nursi, as Yazdioglu points out, uses the term miracle to refer both to ordinary and miraculous occurrences. Unlike the Pharaoh and the people of Saleh, who failed to see the miraculous in God's signs, rebuff his messenger and reject his message, the act of believing in God in the case of the Hupu, the ant, the Queen of Sheba, and the Prophet Solomon did not depend on miraculous signs. In his corroboration of his claim about God's existence and worthiness of adoration, the Hupu propounds that God is He, quote, who brings to light what is hidden in the heavens and the earth and knows what you hide and what you proclaim. As Sarah Lily explains, the Hupu is generally depicted as having the skill to visually perceive the things that are hidden under the ground. This bird has inferred God's existence and greatness from his reflection on the ordinary in his daily experience. He is aware of his divine attribute, and this knowledge has resulted in his understanding the greatness of God. The Queen of Sheba, as Al-Sha'arawi and Mustansir Mill convincingly argue, accepts Solomon's message after he proves the truthfulness of his prophetic message by rejecting her present, prior to the extraordinary incidents of the throne and the hall. Quote, when she saw her magnificent throne magically brought to Solomon, she said, we were given the knowledge before it and we devoted ourselves to God, where it, according to Mir and Al-Sha'arawi, refers to the incident of the throne. Finally, the ant, as mentioned above, is aware that the Prophet Solomon and his army have good intentions. She understands that if the army crushes the ants, it is because they are unaware of her colony's presence. From the exegetical discussions, it is not clear whether the ant found out about Solomon intuitively or through observation. However, from close reading, we can deduce that the ants have inferred Solomon's intention from close observation. The surah thus attributes to non-humans, the Hupu and the ant, rational qualities that allow them to fare better than humans, the Pharaoh, the people of Saleh, and the people of Lot, and to a woman, the Queen of Sheba, rational attributes that are not found in her male peers, excluding the Prophet Solomon. The queen, the Hupu, and the ant observe, reflect, and act upon the knowledge and signs they have and submit to God. The distinction of the Queen of Sheba, the Hupu, and the queen and the ant is highlighted by the contrast formed by the framed stories of those who deny the truth knowingly and do not submit. Framed by the series of stories that depict Israel's forthright rejection of their messengers, Solomon's story appears to communicate the message that deep reflection that is accompanied by real desire for understanding is the best guarantee to infer the truth. This rule, moreover, functions across gender and species line. Rationality, spirituality, and faith of non-humans are not foreign to the Qur'an, as Sarah Lily argues in her book, Animals in the Qur'an, In addition to these animal themes that Lily puts forth, Surah An-Naml shows that non-humans can be signs to humans, even prophets, as I will demonstrate in the structural analysis of verses 15 to 19 that depict the encounter of Solomon and the ant. In the account of the encounter between Solomon and the ant, the concentric structure is formed by the repetition of the word Ibad, God's servants, and the root waza'a, which means to restrain, keep under strict discipline. Placing the ant that Solomon encounters in the center, and highlighting a change in Solomon's attitude. In the upper part of the frame, God says that he has given David and Solomon knowledge. This is followed by Solomon's proclamation that they have been taught the speech of birds and have been given a share of everything. David and Solomon used the root fadalah, which means surplus and extra, to describe the knowledge God has granted them. Quote, and they both said, praise be to God, who has favored us, faddalana, over many of his believing servants. Solomon also uses the same root to describe the ability to understand the language of birds. He says, quote, this is clearly a big favor, هذا لهو الفضل المبين. The expression al-fadl al-mubin is usually translated as the great favor. However, according to the dictionary Lisan al-Arab, the Arabic word fadl means something extra or additional. The adjective mubin means clear, plain, and evident rather than great, as it is usually translated. Therefore, the expression al-fadl al-mubin may point to the extra signs in quality and quantity that God has given Solomon compared to other believing servants. The expression al-fadl al-mubin is highly emphasized by the emphatic inna and lam, and the use of the definite articles in inna, هذا لهو الفضل المبين. Thus, Solomon addresses the people showing from his perspective the indisputable signs. This part of the structure, the frame above the center, ends with a description of Solomon's army in its grandeur and the hosts of jinn, men, and birds that is comprised of, further emphasizing God's considerable signs. The lower part of the frame shows a change in Solomon's attitude. Solomon does not show his supernatural signs to his people. Instead, he asks God to restrain him, awzi'ni, so that he may be thankful for God's favors. The ant in the center of the concentric symmetry is a point of reversal in Solomon's attitude. As mentioned above, it recognizes the righteousness of Solomon and his army, seemingly through rational observations of the familiar and the ordinary, which highlights reflective and inquiring attitudes as the path to knowing the divine. Additionally, Qur'an commentators suggest that what Solomon requests by saying awzi'ni is that God restrain him from becoming heedless of God's signs or puffed up with pride. This is valid interpretation since Solomon expresses a similar concern in verse 40 when the queen's throne is miraculously brought to him. Solomon says, quote, this is a favor from my Lord to test whether I'm grateful or not. So now the conclusion. The story of Solomon in Surah An-Naml consists of short, successive accounts that seem from the first reading to be thematically disconnected. A structural analysis of these accounts revealed that repeated elements such as the root nadara, basara, the roots nadara, basara, and waza'a arrange the accounts into symmetrical patterns that help reveal important messages in the story. A parallel symmetry appears to communicate the message that deep reflection and real desire for understanding is the best guarantee to infer the truth. Two concentric symmetries highlight that this rule functions across gender and species lines. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dalia. The final speaker on this panel doesn't really need much introduction, but Professor Bruce Lawrence received his AB from Princeton University, his MDiv from Harvard, and his PhD from Yale, the almighty trinity, I guess is one of the words that he had just used this morning. For 40 years, Professor Lawrence was a professor of Asian religions and Islamic studies at Duke University, where he is now emeritus professor. He is the author of 15 books, and in 2007, he published his book, The Qur'an, a biography which has been translated into 18 languages. So he will be speaking to us today about Quranic translation as linguistic performance, the case of Surat Maryam. Thank you.
Well, thank you. I'm pleased to be here despite the snow, and as Alton from Minnesota said, for those of us that come from the north, this seems normal. But I must say, as I walked here from the place where I'm staying, and went by a Franciscan monastery and then saw Howard Divinity School, I said, at least the snow is the right metaphor for this calm place in which we're having this wonderful gathering on Tadabbur al-Qur'an. For those of you who know Arabic, you know that Tadabbur has other associations, often do with the backside or sitting down. And so I congratulate all of you on doing Tadabbur al-Qur'an in place. I will try not to challenge you too much in wanting to have coffee and a coffee break, because I'm going to go through my goal, let me tell you, is I'm going to give you something that will make you enjoy the coffee, but hopefully not delay too much that enjoyment, but also that I will not be carded. One of the things that's happened over the years is that it's not because, you know, I'm trying to get alcohol and they're asking me my age, is that I really hate it when someone says, you have 3 minutes to go, 5 minutes to go. So if I get past 15 minutes, oh, Yusuf, I see somebody I know is before. Yusuf, you just raise your hand, and I will take that as a sign that I'm supposed to show up. Shut up, not show up. Okay. I'm going to do something that sort of fits in with the other two wonderful presentations today about images of the Qur'an and looking at them from a sort of deep reading of their narrative importance. And I'm going to look at what I call Quranic translations linguistic performance. I was going to say I'm going to read from Abdullah Yusuf Ali, but then I realized if I had to be at a conference in the Qur'an, there'd be one translation would be sitting right next to me. It would be Abdullah Yusuf Ali. So in case I needed a prop, most of you, I think, know of Abdullah Yusuf Ali. But it's very interesting, almost everywhere that one goes, and one says, okay, let's face it, there are a lot of people who are Muslims and other people who think about Islam who don't know Arabic. Where do they use Abdullah Yusuf Ali? So I just use this as a prop. I didn't put it here, did I? Okay. It was here when I got here. So if you want to see why I'm talking about linguistic performance, please go to your own copy. Or if you don't have one, go online. The most frequently searched translation of the Quran in English is Abdullah Yusuf Ali. So I will come back to Abdullah Yusuf Ali, but I want to start a kind of different perch and talk about the fact that translation itself is contested. And I'm going to talk about what I call soundscapes. That is, not landscape, but the oral texture of language, the soundscape of a primary language, culture, audience. We're now talking about the Quran, 7th century Arabic. And then a different soundscape, the target language, culture, and audience, in this case, 21st century English. And many people say, oh yeah, that's just another problem with translation. I think it's always there, whatever one does, between languages and cultures and traditions. But I think it's especially important because the notion of sajj, we use a couple technical words, the notion of sajj, which I would just translate as rhyme or rhyming prose, cadence, rhyming prose, one person called it in the Quran, that this requires a certain different attention to language in the Quran. And I'm going to focus on the efforts of 4 translators, Arbery and Jones, A.J. Arbery and Alan Jones. For those who want to count creeds, those are non-Muslims. And Abdullah Yusuf Ali and Shawkat Talal are both Muslims, although I've been in more than one setting where someone has said, Abdullah Yusuf Ali wasn't really a Muslim, he was a Boha, but I'm not going to go there. So let us just say, and some of you may stop reading him just because I said that, but don't, really, he's okay despite being a Boha. So I'm going to restrict myself to those 4, and I'm going to look especially at Turawa because, as I said when I had this marvelous conversation with Marmian before today's delayed meeting, I said, you know, many people don't look at Shawkat Turawa. That may be a new name for some of you because he has not translated the whole of the Quran. But I would argue that his partial translations serve a purpose that most of the full, excellent translations in English do not. So if you want to skip most of what I'm going to say in the next 14, 13 minutes, you can just go online, Shawkat Turawa, that's spelled T-O-O-R-A-W-A, and look at his Quran translations. And by looking at them, you will have the gist of what I'm going to try and say in the next 13 minutes. I have a lot to say about Arbery, and I don't want to be carded, so I'm going to skip it. I think we're going to probably publish these things later, but you've all heard of Arbery. You all know what Professor Schimmel, whom I also knew when I was at Harvard, said. He is a wonderful man, Bruce, but these are Victorian lullabies that he has spun out of the Quran. I think he's a little better than that. But you know, there still is something of that Victorian lilt in the translations of Marbury. I'm not going to go into him. I'm not going to go into all of the background for what I say about Tarawa. And by the way, Devin Stewart, since we have someone from the University of Pennsylvania here, we might as well acknowledge this long. Tarawa, by the way, is a PhD also from the University of Pennsylvania. This long tradition of looking at linguistic performance that has itself a basis in the University of Pennsylvania's wonderful curriculum in Arabic studies. I talked then about Marbury, about how Marbury approaches Surah Maryam. Let me just read this. You can see it online, but this is Surah Maryam, the 19th Surah of the Qur'an. Kaf ha ya ayn sad. The mention of thy Lord's mercy unto his servant Zechariah, when he called upon his Lord secretly, saying, O my Lord, behold, the bones within me are feeble. My head is all aflame with hoariness. That's a particular Marbury phrase. My head is all aflame with hoariness. And in calling on thee, my Lord, I have never been hitherto unprosperous. And now I fear my kinsfolk after I am gone, and my wife is barren. So give me from thee a kinsman, who shall be my inheritor, and the inheritor of the house of Jacob, and make him, my Lord, well-pleasing. Response. O Zechariah, we give thee good tidings of a boy whose name is John. No namesake have we given him aforetime. He said, O my Lord, how shall I have a son? See, my wife is barren, and I have attained to the decline of old age. I can identify with that. Said he, so it shall be. Thy Lord says, easy is that for me, seeing that I created thee aforetime, when thou wast nothing. He said, Lord, appoint to me some sign. Said he, thy sign is that thou shalt not speak to men, though being without fault, 3 nights. So he came forth unto his people from the sanctuary. Then he made a signal to them, give you glory at dawn and evening. And that's just the first 11 verses. But you get enough of the feeling of the cadence of how Marbury does it. I then talk about Alan Jones. It's a whole other question of how you use assonance. There's a different rhyme scheme to get up a remarkable linguistic density and layers of meaning in the Qur'an. And I'm going to skip Jones in the effort of not being carded because he does something that picks up, by the way, he's a student of Marbury's. I just say this as a brief. Those of you who don't know Alan Jones, he taught Arabic at Oxford for 40 years and said at the end, but now that I'm retired, I'm going to translate the Qur'an. Translated the Qur'an and appeared in 2007. Many of the places where I go talking about translation of the Qur'an, people have not heard of Alan Jones. I said, why not? I mean, this is a smart dude. He spent a whole lifetime working at this. Why not? Because he had one simple principle. He wanted to imagine, by the way, his specialty was Jahili poetry. So you understand how the people at the time of Prophet Muhammad understood what he was saying that Jibreel had revealed to him. So he's looking at the linguistic reception in 7th century Arabia, and what he comes up with are different rhymes than those that are given in the actual versification of chapters of the Quran. He doesn't change, he doesn't do the thing of changing the order of the Quran. He doesn't go through all that stuff. He doesn't talk about the history of it. But he talks about the meaning of the rhyme, and he changes it. So some people find this incredibly, some people say heretical, but at least idiosyncratic, and so they don't use him for that reason. And I have a whole long thing on him, but let me just tell you, he's a student of Marbury, and I make a long point about how they're a student. This phrase, my head is aflame with hoariness. If you've never heard that before, you don't know Victorian English, it means something very distinct that you could only get if you were Victorian. And I'll just leave that as a puzzle. I talk about it later. But I want to get on to the meaning of how Jones and Marbury try and translate the Quran, but they don't come up with something that Yusuf Ali did, and I think Shaukat Tarawa does even better. So listen now. I'm skipping because I want to get through this in the interest of time. I've gone from Marbury, who I read to you. I skipped Alan Jones, who's Marbury's student, and now I'm going to read Abdullah Yusuf Ali on the same first 11 verses of the 19th chapter, Surah Maryam, of the Noble Book of Holy Quran. In the name of God. But all of you should just say, well, wait a minute, that's not the Yusuf Ali I read. I could get it. It would take too much time. Get your own Yusuf Ali. Go online, look at your own Yusuf Ali. It will not be in the name of God. Pause. It will be in the name of Allah. And as one Quran, Imam Ad-Din said in looking at it, Amana Publications decided to detranslate what Abdullah Yusuf Ali translated. And so even in the basmala, it's not in the name of God, most gracious, most merciful. It's the name of Allah, most gracious, most merciful. And therein lies a whole other story, which I will not. She's checking on me. If I'm wrong, I will sit down early. I promise. If she finds the name of God, most gracious, most merciful, I'm done. I'm toast. I'm out of here. So we may have an interruption and an early end and coffee for you. So let me just go ahead, assuming she's going to find what I think is there. Mario, in the name of God. This is the original accent, the original Abdullah Yusuf Ali. In the name of God, most gracious, most merciful. Kaf ha ya ayn sad. This is a recital of the mercy of thy Lord to his servant Zakaria. Behold, he called to his Lord in secret, praying, O my Lord, infirm indeed are my bones, and the hair of my head doth glisten with gray. Not a whore, not a flame of hoariness. You hear the difference? I mean, I don't need to go through this, do I? You can hear the difference between a flame with hoariness and my head doth glisten with gray. They say, I don't like to glisten with gray. Well, actually, as long as it's hair, I don't mind the color either. But here is really interesting. All those who have talked about it. So here you've got a difference, a very major difference in translating. The hair of my head doth glisten with gray, but never am I unblessed with my Lord in my prayer to thee. Now I fear what my relatives and colleagues will do after me. But my wife is barren, so give me an heir as from thyself. Response. This prayer was answered, O Zechariah, we give thee good news of the son. His name shall be Yahya. So again, Yusuf Ali doesn't always translate Yahya, obviously, as John. He retains the original because Zechariah and Yahya has an internal rhyme. O Zechariah, his name shall be Yahya. On none but that name have we conferred distinction before. He said, O my Lord, how shall I have a son when my wife is barren? I have grown quite decrepit from old age. He said, so it will be. Thy Lord said, it's easy for me. I did indeed create thee before, but thou hast been nothing. Says Zechariah, O my Lord, give me a sign. Thy sign was the answer. It shall be that thou wilt speak to no man for 3 nights, although you are not dumb. So Zechariah came out to his people from his chamber. He told them by signs to celebrate God's praises in the morning and the evening, etc. Now my argument, and I'll cut to the quick, my argument here is as wonderful as Abdullah Yusuf Ali is. I'm making a 2-track argument. The first and most major argument is it's really important not just to translate the Quran into accurate English, but English that has a resonance in sound, a soundscape that appeals to, I'm not going to say it equals, certainly does not exceed the original Arabic, but appeals to someone whose original language is English and who may not know Arabic, or if he or she knows Arabic, cannot appreciate the fuller valence of the Arabic without something that at least hints at it in English. That's my first argument. My second argument is that all those people who've done this work, I cite 2 of the best, at least I think, A.J. Arbery and Alan Jones, who tried to pay attention to rhyme in their English. It's not that I don't like Abdul Halim, we were talking about Halim. He's a wonderful friend, he's a friend of mine. I hope I get invited back to more Quranic conferences in London and so as. But I still think his translation, as accurate as it is, does not have this tonal sense, this affective element that you find in Arbery and Jones and also in Abdullah Yusuf Ali. And now the person whom I think is the epitome of all this effort, in other words, the person who does it the best, Shaukat Turawa. So let me kind of end my, because I know I'm getting close to having a hand raised. Let me, and so far, was that right up here?
I was just checking the English.
So I get to finish my 15 minutes. This is, just listen to the quality of Shaukat Turawa. For those of you who don't know anything about him, just go online, look at some of his other translations. The whole, by the way, the whole of Surah Maryam and several others he has done online, you can find them. But this is just the first 11 verses. The first 11 verses of Surah Maryam. And I'm doing this as an act of performance, not only an act of translation and understanding. Kaf, ha, ya, ayn, sad. Oh, by the way, sorry, let me begin with the basmala. His basmala, this is Shaukat Turawa. In the name of God, Lord of mercy, full of mercy. There's a whole other lecture, discussion, translating the Rahman and Rahim not as 2 different words, most gracious, most merciful, or most merciful, most magnanimous. But the Rahman and Rahim come from a single word. So if you're going to do it in English, and you want somebody to have any sense of what it means, or might mean, or should mean in Arabic, you've got to use the same word in English. So he does it. Tilawa does it. In the name of God, Lord of mercy, full of mercy. Kaf ha ya ayin sad. A recollection of your Lord's mercy to Zachary, when he called to his Lord, calling secretly, saying, my Lord, my bones have weakened, and my head blazes gray. Oh, I love that. My head blazes gray. I think that's really good. My head blazes gray, but never in petitioning you, my Lord, have I felt despondency. I fear my heirs who shall come after me. My heirs who shall come after me, and my wife is barren, bestow on me from you a better way of getting through this. I had this and I clicked the wrong thing here. I'll get it in a minute. Here we go. I fear my heirs who shall come after my wife is barren. Bestow on me from you directly an heir and accessory, one who will inherit my legacy and inherit that of Jacob's family, and make him, my Lord, most pleasing and kindly. O Zachary, we give you good tidings of a son whose name will be John. We have named no one before similarly. My Lord, how can I have a son, he asked, when my wife is barren and I have become so old, ungainly? It shall be so, he said. Your Lord says that it's easy for me. I created you before when you were nothing, with facility. My Lord, show me a sign, he said. Your sign, he replied, is that you shall not, though well, address people for 3 days and 3 nights fully. So he left the sanctuary and went to his people, gesturing to them to worship morning and night. So he has internal rhyme, external rhyme. He tries to make something of a larger statement and a performance of this. I go on to say there are 3 things. This is the last I want to say. I'm going to stop. First of all, the rhyme counts. 3 points I'm making about these 4 translations and why I think Tanakh was the best of the 4. Rhyme counts, but it's not only end rhyme, it's middle rhyme. Second, there is what Devin Stewart has called the importance of echo. It's not merely that there's rhyme, there's an echo of what is rhymed in the narrative and also in the presentation of the narrative. And finally, the crucial point is not the meaning of the surah, but its intention. It's not really figuring out what it says, but what is it intended to do. And here it seems to be Tanakh breaks new ground. By opting for Zachary over the more common Zakaria, he explains, it's rhyming the latter would have been more difficult than rhyming the former has proven to be, and in thinking about how the Qur'an itself has come into this larger realm of revelation, what it does, the previous revelation has not done, and no one else has been able to do in Arabic since, is to render meaning from translation, meaning from sound, rather than sound from meaning. So the sound precedes the meaning, and in some ways informs it. And this is what he's trying to do to give an echo of this in English. And so I end, and this is my final statement, Ethiopia. Often when I have a class and somebody says, what's the first hijrah? And everyone says, oh, 622. I say, no. First hijrah was to Ethiopia. It was the Congress. It was in 615. It was when the prophet wasn't even sure, although he had confidence that the mission would succeed, but he wanted to have a little resident. He wanted to have someone out there who said, well, we almost made it in Arabia, maybe someday in Africa. So it was Nagrus. It was Ethiopia. One of the first, if you will, Christian-Muslim encounters was before Islam was a religion. It was still a protest movement in 7th century Arabia. And it was there that this surah, Surah Maryam, was recited before the king of Ethiopia. So I asked my friends, was it recited in Arabic or Amharic? The answer I got, by the way, I've been to Ethiopia 4 times. The answer I get there as well as elsewhere is, it had to have been recited in Arabic, but he didn't get Arabic, so it must have been a really good translation in Amharic. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Lawrence. I'd like to now allow for perhaps 15 minutes of questions, and if there are more, you can certainly come and speak to the speakers directly after the particular panel. Is there anyone who wants to start us off with questions? Yes.
This is a question for Professor Lawrence.
So you've read the other lecture that I prepared. Excuse me, Martin especially should be laughing because I said to him over breakfast this morning that I just came back from 3 weeks in India, where I was lecturing. Didn't really matter what, but often it referred with reference to the Qur'an, and always before, mostly, not solely, but mostly Muslim audiences. So someone would say, and what about Muhammad Hassan? And I would say, well, what do you think about him? Well, it's too bad he became Pakistani, but he was a really good Muslim. So I didn't want to get into politics. No, I'm not joking. I think he, I say, but his real name was Leopold Weiss, and then he became Muhammad Hassan. Oh, yeah, that's right. He was a good Jew who became a better Muslim. Okay. But did he become a better translator? And a lot of the arguments that I get, and by the way, I should preface it by saying, I am a great fan of Muhammad Hassan's rendition, not for what I was talking about this morning, because had I pulled him out from there, you would have said, oh, give me Muhammad Abdul Halim, or even give me Khan and Halal. Well, no, maybe not that. But I mean, give me something else that sort of unpacks the Quran, but not with as many parenthetical remarks, as many footnotes and asides. So it's very hard to do what I'm trying to say is the demand. I would say it's the demand, not the only requirement. The demand of the Quran is that if it is to be rendered in any other language, there has to be some echo. Not a transparent translation, but at least a dim echo of the original Arabic. I don't hear the dim echo in Muhammad Hassan. Much as I love his ambition, much as I agree with, not all, but with some, especially sort of using great problems with how he does music, that's another thing. But I think in many ways, he's trying very hard to be what some people call a conformist neo-Mu'tazili who is not dismissed as someone who is only a Mu'tazili. But he's looking for a larger way of saying the Quran really is about rational, not about superstitious practices, and this is how you can understand it in my translation. So yes, and by the way, even if I didn't like his translations, I'd use the Book Foundation, the Ali Reza sponsored translation edition of his that was done with Ahmed Mustafa's calligraphy at the beginning of some surahs. So I think even if one doesn't agree, and I don't happen to agree with all of Muhammad Hassan's translation, the aesthetic quality of that particular edition, which was done from Ali Reza Foundation in Jeddah, Saudi Arabia, I think makes it something which should be in everybody's library. That's my 5 minutes. 50 minutes we can talk longer.
Yes.
Yes, I want to say I thought all three presentations were brilliant. Looking forward to the rest of this conference, what we're up to. My question is for Sarah Cleary. I don't know if this is working, but I'll speak loud enough and you can all hear me now. My question is for Sarah Cleary. I love your presentation, and I found it very convincing, but I think it needs something, and maybe the lack of time was the reason you didn't do this. In addition to marshaling all the arguments in support of your point of view, I think you have to deal with the ones that might be brought to bear against it. And in particular, I'm thinking that when the Quran would have a verse reassuring the prophet that you cannot, that people's hearts have been hardened, and what you say is not going to change anyone's mind. How does that come into play against your argument about, stones that gush forth water? And in particular, for example, the verses that I'm alluding to appear in that surah, Surah Al-Hijr, or are they in other parts of the Quran? And if they do appear in that surah, how would you counterpose them against?
I'm not so sure I get your point. Perhaps if you could rephrase.
In some points in the Quran, the prophet is told there are some people who are not going to be reached by his preaching.
True.
Because their hearts have been hardened.
Yes.
All right? Now, they may not, in those verses, maybe they don't use the stone analogy, but nonetheless, I think it fits in with what you're talking about. So the question is, might not a critic of your analysis say, you're saying the Quran can even crack the heart of stone.
Yes.
But there are verses that seem to say it will not crack the heart of stone.
Well, actually, I think it says that it will not crack the hearts of humans, but not of stone. Because the word qaswa, if we're talking about qaswa, throughout the Quran, it is used with the hearts of human beings. It occurs only once in Surah Al-Baqarah with stones and hearts, in this comparison between human hearts, like just to say that these human hearts are as hard as stones, or even harder because stones are capable of doing all of this. So even in this case, the human hearts are even harder than the. So I think, I don't think this actually works against the thesis, because as a matter of fact, like this is, like the statistics of the Qur'an is not my main research area. I work mostly on animals and the natural world in the Qur'an, and I do hold the view that the Qur'an presents the natural view as much better than the human being, because the whole nature is Muslim. Like all the non-human and non-jinni nature is Muslim. It is, like stones are capable of falling, falling down in awe of God. So it is the human hearts. Yes, the human hearts can be harder, and some of them are not going to be cracked or split, or like the Qur'an is not going to enter them. So it's not this is true. Like I think the Qur'an is clear about this. Like it is very critical, in fact, of the human being. It's like in like a fat, a food, etc. All the negative characterizations of the Qur'an. And I don't know if this answers your question, or
Yes, very much. And all I was saying is that by adding that to what you said, it strengthens what you said.
okay, thank you.
Yes.
This is to Dr. Lawrence. Is it work?
For recording it.
Sure. I thank you very much for the allusion to the different translations and their Qur'an and context and meaning. I was just struck by a clause you made by referring to the prophets, the beginning of Islam as a protest movement. To me, it sounded a little, I couldn't get that very well, because I think every prophet comes to his people first to acknowledge the presence of God, second to critique society, and third to redirect humanity to the Creator God. And in the process, they are met with a backlash. So if you call the beginning of Islam, which is a similar story, as a protest movement, I don't know, probably we need some clarification on that.
You said a crucial moment.
Protest.
Or protest movement, a dissent movement. No, I wasn't saying that was my judgment. I was saying that in terms of what was the reception of the prophet's message, I wasn't saying that it was framed as a protest movement, but what people were seeing, all the verses in the Quran referred to the unbelievers saying, oh, and the fact that people from the Quraysh who followed him follow Ja'far, follow the followers of the prophet to Abyssinia or Ethiopia, they all said, oh, these people are rebels. They framed it as a dissident group. That wasn't my view. I'm saying that those people who opposed him were saying, oh, don't believe him. What he's really doing is undercutting our economy. He's challenging our way of life. So, I wasn't giving the Quranic or the prophetic or the view of the Prophet Muhammad himself about it. I was saying the unbelievers, or more than that, the people who were intent on destroying the Muslim community before it could flourish, were saying, oh, here's just a dissent movement. Maybe I was doing too strong an echo, but I was trying to echo feeling that this was something which didn't have anything to do with religion, had everything to do with tribal values, with a way of life, with an economy and society, and also a political system that was threatened by this new message. So it wasn't the Muslim, but the anti-Muslim message.
Thank you for the explanation.
Well, first, thank you all for wonderful presentations. My question is actually for Dalia. I found it fascinating, your presentation of concentric structure. I think it adds to the literature that's drawing on this idea is, that you had top three, what are the larger implications of this? Is it the case that we can look throughout the Quran and find concentric structures, or we're going to find instances where concentric theories does not hold up? And then across or beyond the Quran itself, what does it mean on the genealogy text, right? Throughout Mesopotamia, it has this concentric structure to it. Because oftentimes part of the whole image of the Quran is its uniqueness, its distinctness from things that have come before. But yet this seems to imply that, oh, Homeric poems have concentric structures to it. Elements of the Bible have concentric structures to it.
I don't know. It's very good question. To me, as I don't know if I will say what it comes to my mind. It's to me, I was able to understand more the surahs and the Quran by detecting and following the related elements in it, and this helped me to understand more. And the first when I noticed this, because when we recite the Quran and try to memorize it, so I would see myself switching from one surah to a totally different surah. And then I would ask myself, why did you do that? And then I realized that these two verses are equally very similar. So then I tried to reflect and say, okay, next time when you recite, you have to make any mnemonic device so that you remember that this verse is in this surah and this other similar verse is in a different surah. But then I started to think, okay, but there is this is relevant here and this is relevant there, and then by comparing both surahs and these verses, I then reached a higher understanding of, it's added more layers of meanings, one after the other, and I realized that there's a connection and thematic continuity between the two surahs. And this happens with many surahs, one after the other. So it's like a link that helps you to connect different parts of the surah and different meanings and build on them and reach more and more understanding. So I don't know if I'm answering your question, but I'm just sharing what I have in mind. And one of the things also is that when you do that, sorry, I wanted to say.
If I may add something about this, actually, like this range or concentric, or like what Daniel has been discussing today, is a common feature of orality. So it's not unique to the Quran. We find this in Islamic poetry, for example. We find it in the Bible, but it's not reflected in the current translations that we see of the Bible. Like actually, when we look at older translations, we find many other elements of orality, like a lot of repetition, a lot more repetition than we see in the more, like the used translation. So that was catering, like this style was catering to a society that was primarily oral, because when you are oral, like when you belong to this oral society, you don't have a text to go to. So you have to have the meaning, the most important message of the text, somewhere in the middle, not toward the end. And you have to repeat it many times, because the listener does not have the luxury of looking at text and going back to check whatever was missed. So that was catering to that society, and like the Quran, because it was revealed mainly, like primarily, like to that society. So it is also in the same oral style. I don't know if this adds.
Something. Speaking of translation, by the way, for me, I used many translations. One of them was Alan Jones.
Oh, you did?
But what I want to say is that he keeps repeated elements in his translation.
Oh, yes.
So this helped me with this is one of the things that.
Oh, I'm happy to know that he hasn't disappeared.
So he keeps most of them. So it's which is interesting. It was interesting.
Yes, Catherine and then.
Yeah, I just, in my research, maybe I didn't follow the same methodology, but I used the same term across the Meccan and Medina verses to try to have a more holistic understanding of the term. And it helped me a lot, but at some points I couldn't keep the consistency. So when you say it's unique, it is unique. I mean, it does help you tremendously to understand repetitive terms more holistically, have different layers of meaning, she says. But at the end of the day, you still face the fact that there are some places where you can't figure out why is this here, or why this is going on. So it's not completely, I'm not using the same eccentric structure, but a similar kind of structure, which helps me understand much more, but it doesn't answer everything. So if that, there is some kind of uniqueness that maybe we don't know how to go about it. There may be a way, but I don't know it myself. So.
Yes.
It's proof of the same thing, though. Just to say, well, thanks, Tanya, for this interesting paper on this method as well. And more particularly, I would like to ask you if you thought of using Talmud texts about Solomon and the Queen of Sheba, not as a source for your understanding of the Quran, but as a comparison, especially of the structure. Because I heard there was a work done by Olivier Bogios, probably in French, but about the Queen of Sheba in the Talmud and in the Quran. And I was wondering if that might happen.
Yeah, I didn't do that, but probably I'll do that after you're suggesting. Yeah, I'll be very interested. And actually, when I started working on this semantic rhetoric and this social analysis, I referred to biblical Hebrew. And actually, because I noticed this, as I said, from my memorization, but then I had the course, a one-year course of biblical Hebrew. So I said, okay, let's see what's in there. And then I found the book of Jerome T. Walsh, and it's almost the same structure, the same, But the difference is that in the Qur'an, the repetition is more verbal. But in the Bible, as far as in the Hebrew Bible, it's more thematic. So this is what I saw is different. But definitely, yes, I agree. And I will do that. Thank you for the suggestion.
Thank you. I'm going to stop it here just because we have started late. I'm sorry?
The mic is working.
Fantastic, just in time. But if it's now about 10 after 11, and so if we could maybe take 10 or 15 minutes, and if you want to help yourself to coffee, and there's still plenty of breakfast in the student lounge down the hall, please do that, and then we will come back for our second panel. I want to thank our panelists for a fascinating opening panel. Thank you very much.
One, two, three.
How's the baby? Where? Okay. You're not okay, so you have to drive it there. Right?
You know, Dr.